If you're having trouble priming your pool pump, and it's not a new pool pump, it's an existing pump, it's worked all along, and for whatever reason today, right now, it won't prime for you. The steps that I would follow are as with the first video. You don't just fill the chamber with water once and close the lid and try it. You need to do that many times, sometimes 5, 6 times. Fill the chamber with water, turn it on, and let it run for a couple of minutes and see if it starts. After 5, 6 times of doing that and it's still not priming, okay, I'm willing to believe that there might be a problem here that we should investigate further. And the first thing that I would look at is make sure that the O-ring on the lid is still there. A lot of times with different pump styles, that O-ring's kind of permanently in place and you never really deal with it. And then one day you take the lid off and you don't notice that the O-ring actually comes off with the lid this time as opposed to staying with the pump housing. And it could drop on the ground and you wouldn't even notice it. You know, the amount of O-rings that I find sitting around in the pool equipment is, let's just say it's quite a few. So the first thing I would do is take a good look around and make sure that you haven't dropped an O-ring somewhere in dealing with the day-to-day maintenance of the pump. But most specifically for the lid itself. Also, you want to inspect that lid gasket. They don't last forever. There's a lot of reasons why it could have failed. In fact, there could have been a lubricant put on it which was the wrong kind of lubricant and it could have caused it to degrade. It could be that it's just an older O-ring and it's failed, or it's grown over time because it's absorbed water and now it doesn't really fit into the receiver that it's supposed to fit into properly. A lot of reasons. So definitely take a good hard look at that O-ring gasket. There's a lot of reasons why that could be giving you a problem. Could be that one time you put the lid on and the gasket was displaced and you pinched it and now it's got like a big flat spot on it or something like that. For the cost of a new gasket, I would just go ahead and pick up a new one and see if that doesn't solve your problem. Be sure to lubricate it with a silicone-based lubricant, never with a petroleum-based lubricant like Vaseline. That's the kind of thing that can cause damage to it and cause a failure over time. So if you're like, hey, well, I always use Vaseline on mine and it's never been a problem, but you're watching this video on why your pump won't prime, it's probably because the O-ring's dead and you should get a new one and you should pick up some silicone-based lubricant at the time that you're there. It's specifically made for pool and spa applications, so it's not going to hurt to have some of that around. If you're pretty confident that it's not the O-ring on the lid, then the next most to be a thread sealant such as Teflon tape, gas tape, silicone. You also see people use epoxy, or if you had a threaded connection that was leaking, somebody opens a thing of epoxy and just smears it all over the place. That's a disaster. Never do that. Hopefully that's not what's happened to your pump. If it is, you may very well need a new pump. There's really no way to fix that, and that's certainly not the way that you would try to solve a suction side leak on a threaded connection, is by smearing epoxy over it. To solve it, you need to remove the connection. So a lot of times you'll see that there's unions built into plumbing systems. This is one of the reasons that the unions are there. Partially is for winterization, but the other part is for service. So let's say your pump's not priming, you could just open up the union that's maybe 12 inches in front of your pump, and then you could actually take apart that whole threaded connection to the pump. You could reapply a new sealant like 100% silicone or Teflon tape if you know how to use it, and make that connection again, let it set overnight, and then try again and see if your pump won't prime this time. If it still won't prime, then one of the things I would check is that that union that we were just talking about. If you open that union, well, it's probably got an O-ring as well. And the unions and valves, the O-rings and unions and valves, are the easiest to lose. So if you have like a single union ball valve that you open and deal with sometimes, great chance that you've lost the O-ring on that. So be sure to check anything on the suction side to make sure that you're not losing any pressure through there. I guess another thing, maybe it's obvious, maybe it's not, you should definitely double check. Don't just assume you did it. Maybe you closed a valve on the suction side of the pump. If you had a three-way valve, maybe you still have it turned over to the vacuum port for a sidewall vacuum port, but it's closed right now, so you'd be starving the pump for water. Or it could just be that you have a single union ball valve and you closed it and you forgot to open it. That happens. Probably that's the most common thing. So maybe that's the very first thing you should check, is just make sure that you're not starving the pump for water. And that's not just on the suction side, it needs to be on the return side as well. If you're deadheading the pump's obviously not going to be able to run properly. And I guess the last thing that I would look at if you have an existing pump that won't prime is maybe there's a blockage in the suction line somewhere. People seem to have a tendency to go to this first, like, oh, my pump won't prime, there must be a blockage in the line. It's incredibly rare that that's actually the problem. Basically, there needs to be some sort of symptom that points you in that direction. Like, there I was vacuuming, 1,000 acorns off the bottom of my pool, and the next thing you know, my pool pump won't prime. You don't say. So in a situation like that, it's almost certainly a blocked line. But if you haven't done any vacuuming, it's the middle of the season, and you're not doing like a big spring clean out or something, it's probably not the case. I guess kids could sometimes do that. Think it's fun to take out the skimmer basket and drop something in there, or maybe double check and make sure that your skimmer basket is intact. That's one of the functions of that skimmer basket. It's to prevent that, larger debris from being drawn in. And if you operate your swimming pool underneath things like trees with walnuts and acorns and stuff, and you don't have a skimmer basket, your skimmer basket's cracked and broken, which often they are, that could easily be the source of the problem, is that you could have ended up with some debris getting stuck in the suction line, and the way that you solve that is actually to blow out the line in reverse. You probably don't have a blower strong enough to do it yourself. Even one of those big wet dry shop vacs from the hardware store that's 6.5 horsepower, they don't have nearly enough force. Maybe like a gas-powered leaf blower, if you built like a contraption to connect it to the suction side port, you could try blowing out backwards to the pool that way. But swimming pool technicians have air blowers that we use for winterization and things like that, and they're very powerful and fairly expensive. And that's what we would use to solve that problem. So if I had an existing swimming pool pump that would not prime, those are all of the factors that I would look to first to see if there's a problem. Actually, I'm going to throw in one more there. Let's say I've got a sand filter and it's been forever since I backwashed that sand filter. Could be that the thing's almost plugged and that the pump simply can't push through it, and that could be giving you a similar effect to as if you had a closed valve somewhere in the system. So those are all the things I'd look at, and hopefully one of those will help solve your problem.